Hey everybody, welcome back to Retro Modding News, my monthly video where I talk about what's new and upcoming in the world of retro console modding. The sponsor of this week's video is PCBWay, but more on PCBWay later. Raspberry Pi has announced that the Pico W now has Bluetooth support. Now, what does it have to do with retro console modding? Well, it doesn't really have anything to do with Bluetooth, but I noticed that WebHDX made a comment on that post saying that there might be some other impressive things that we could do with the Pico W. They mentioned that they might be able to emulate the GameCube's Broadband adapter, which is the Ethernet adapter for the GameCube that allowed you to play some games online. There were only a couple of games that had online functionality, so the Broadband adapters are kind of rare, and if you were looking to buy one of those on eBay or something, they go over $200 at least pretty easily. So giving the GameCube the Broadband adapter functionality, allowing it to connect to a network, is kind of important if you're running something like RetroNAS, which allows you to stream games over your network instead of having to load them onto your ODE or play them off of an SD card. You can just kind of have all your games on your RetroNAS setup. So while it doesn't really have anything to do specifically with the Bluetooth functionality, I think it was just interesting that WebHDX mentioned that the Pico W could be used in a really interesting way to give your GameCube Ethernet functionality. Sir, this is a Wendy's. No, Sir scanned an N64 Controller Shell and has uploaded the STL file so that you can 3D print your own N64 Controller Shell. Judging from these 3D renders here, it does look like a pretty challenging print, although they seem to manage it, and I'm wondering now if they printed it vertically, because if you look on the inside, this just seems like a nightmare to try to print it yourself, although I guess the faceplate you probably could print down on your print bed if you have some supports. I think this would be really interesting if you had a resin printer. You could probably print some pretty interesting clear resin or colored resin N64 controller shells. Scans like this N64 controller shell are important for hardware preservation, in my opinion, because there's going to be a day when, I don't know, maybe it will just become more rare and rare to be able to get an OEM N64 controller. Maybe the electronics outlive the plastics. I don't really know what things are going to look like 5-10 years from now, but it's pretty important to have accurate dimensional scans of all of these plastics. That way we kind of know what the originals were like in case we want to recreate them in the future. Humble Bazooka is working on a couple of new BlueRetro adapters. One of them is for the PCFX, I think that's the one on the right in the post here, and the other one is for the Dreamcast. Now, the sort of weird thing about having BlueRetro adapters for consoles that don't really have readily available Bluetooth replacements, or like Bluetooth controllers that look like the OEM controller, I always kind of shrug at that because, I don't know, you have to kind of pick a controller that's close enough but not quite. That's why I always prefer to stick with wireless controllers that look exactly like the OEM controllers. That's just what I prefer. But there aren't any Bluetooth Dreamcast controllers, and I don't even know what the PCFX controller looks like. But I'm really interested to see who is going to be the first company to release a Dreamcast controller. Either maybe something like 8BitDo, where they have a drop-in replacement PCB to make it wireless, or if it's going to be a completely reimagined controller like the Retro Fighters controller, but wireless. Anyways, for now, with the popularity of BlueRetro, this is the first step of actually having the adapters. That way, when controllers come, or in the meantime, you can use alternate controllers so that you can play your Dreamcast or PCFX games using wireless controllers. Speaking of BlueRetro, it looks like Greg from LaserBear is working on some new packaging for the upcoming GameCube internal BlueRetro adapter revision that they've been working on. What's interesting about this packaging is that it's going to be inside of a GameCube game case. So this is the manual or the insert in front of the game case. And if we take a look through, this is like, I think this is a render of some foam, like a foam insert that will go into a GameCube case. So you install your internal BlueRetro PCB, and then you put your original one back in this case, and then you can put it on the shelf, and it will match all of your GameCube games. Oh, I guess it's not foam. I guess it's a 3D print, or maybe the final revision will be foam. But here is a picture of the original GameCube controller board put away inside of this 3D print. I think this is interesting, although I'm kind of bummed because I have the V1 of the internal GameCube BlueRetro adapter, so I'm interested if they're going to be selling just the case for owners of the original internal GameCube BlueRetro adapter. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this person's name, but their Twitter handle is ClusterM, and they're talking about this FDS Key project, which is an open source, low-cost Famicom Disk System drive emulator. So if you know anything about the Famicom Disk System, Obviously, the disk part of the disk system is a whole separate thing, and it connects to the Famicom with a couple of different cables. So this product looks like it could completely emulate that disk portion of the Famicom Disk System to allow you to emulate the drive games, which is pretty cool. The other thing I think is cool about this FDS key project is it allows you to write to physical Famicom Disk System disks. I believe that would just allow you to change what game is written to a disk. So if you do have some working FDS disks, you can write to them with this FDS key, which I thought was cool. If you're looking to buy an FDS key instead of having to put it together yourself, it looks like Muramasa intends on selling them. So there is an interest check page open on their website. If you're interested in buying an FDS key, check out the link in the description to Muramasa's site. There are a couple of NES power module replacement updates this month, including this one from Merlin Shaw. I know I talk about Merlin Shaw replacement power boards for the NES. I've been talking about that for a while now, but this one is a version that is using USB-C for power input. So instead of having a barrel jack for a wall adapter, this is just going to be using, I believe it's just 5-volt input through a USB Type-C connector in the back. And I believe that this version here is for a stock console, so you don't need an NES RGB mod to have this power module. This should just be a matter of desoldering your RF module with this power board attached to it, and then resoldering this new module onto it. The other replacement NES power board this month is from the Real Phoenix. If you don't know the Real Phoenix, they did a couple of runs of the NES IO. I believe it was a project from Bordy, but in this case I think this is a new product that they're calling the NES AV Demodulator. Demodulator in the sense of it's removing the RF modulator from the console. It's not really demodulating anything. So it's not necessarily a replacement for the NES IO, but I believe that this can be used in multiple different ways, similar to the Merlin Shaw board that works with the NES RGB. You can use it either as a replacement for the stock power board and RF modulator, so you get rid of that and you just have component. And does this have like a stereo audio mod? No, it looks like this is just composite and a single mono audio output. But you can also use this with the NES RGB. You can see that there's a flex cable here and a little QSB that's intended to solder on top of the NES RGB. However, I don't see in here what the ports are going to be. So my guess probably is a Genesis 2 style mini DIN in the back here. I don't think they're going to be using the NES RGB style DIN, but it's not populated on this board. Let's see how many pins. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 9 pins. So that looks more like a Sega Genesis. So I'm unsure what the actual physical connector is going to be for the NES RGB output. So it's kind of interesting that you can use this for either an NES RGB console or to replace the stock power board in a stock console. I believe I talked about this PS2 Slim power supply distribution block last month, but Kaitor has released basically the case design, a render of the case design for that PS2 Slim power distribution block. And wouldn't you know, it's designed to look like a PS2, but he's calling it the PSU. So I think that's kind of clever, and it looks really awesome. So both sides of this are going to be for different consoles. So you're going to have the input be the PS2 Slim power supply, and then you can break that out into your different consoles. Here's just a close-up look on the inside here. Some of these are going to be center negative, some of these are going to be center positive, but I believe they're all the same diameter. So any consoles that you're going to have to change the diameter of the barrel jacks from one end to the next, I believe that will be done just with extension cables on the outside. Now, it looks like on this tweet that they are working with a factory to offer 18 gauge, 1.7 millimeter cables in various lengths. So this will be probably a pretty custom thing for your setup. And the other thing that's interesting, I think they mentioned somewhere, oh, here it is. It looks like you can daisy chain 2 of these together for a maximum of 21 connected consoles. Now, that doesn't mean they can all be powered at the same time. It looks like there's a max power on of about 4 at the same time. I don't know who's actually turning a bunch of consoles on at the same time. I suppose if you are a streamer or if you are doing recordings of a bunch of different consoles, you might. But there is a max load limit on the actual PS2 Slim power supply. And I don't think there's any circuitry inside of here that will restrict any of that. So you should still be careful when you're connecting things to this. You could overload the PS2 Slim power adapter. So I think it looks great, and I think it'll be really useful. I'm not really sure if I'm going to be getting one of these because I don't have all my consoles plugged in at the same time, usually ever. And I also have a triad set up in case I do want to power on a console. I can use a new power adapter. But if you've got a huge setup and you want to have all your consoles connected at the same time, this seems like a cool option for that. Okay, so we're back to Greg from LaserBear, and they have a new LCD project, and I think that we can guess kind of what it is already. So based on the fact that he's playing Double Dash here, and just from a couple of the comments below here that this is for GameCube and they're working with a company in China to develop this, I believe that this might be a flip-up screen for the GameCube, like a modern one, which kind of makes sense if he's already working on the dual replacement LCD. So he's getting more and more familiar with these LCDs. There is the LCD CRT iPad screen product that he has, and with that dual replacement screen, it is only the next logical step that there will be this flip-up screen for the GameCube. I think somewhere else in the tweets that he mentioned that this will be external HDMI input only. I don't think this will interface directly with the GameCube internally, probably for GameCubes that have an HDMI mod already. So you'll just plug the screen into your HDMI modded GameCube externally and it will show up on the screen. I don't know exactly how it might be powered. If this is just speculation, I'm not 100% sure if that's what this thing is. It might have just a separate USB-C that you'll have to plug in, but I think that would be an interesting thing for honestly just flexing. I really don't see the need in 2023 for a flip-up screen for the GameCube, as if the GameCube couldn't really get more decked out than it is this year. But it is a really interesting throwback to the times when we had things like the PS1 flip-up screen, and I think the original Xbox had a flip-up screen, the PS2. So this is a really big throwback to those days. And with modern LCD technology, IPS screens, and stable refresh rates and low power, 2002 me would be super excited for something like this. Mike Chi is showing off the finalized RetroTink 4K design with these high resolution MJF 3D prints. So basically this is what the final design of the RetroTink 4K is going to look like. I don't think it's going to change at this late in its development cycle. But one of the interesting things from this picture is you can hide, it looks like the composite video and S-video ports are located in the front of the unit, and they can be shown or hidden with a sliding screen in the front. So I think that's a pretty neat feature. Also, there is like this essential oil warmer. That's not really what it is, but I don't do that to yours. But I like the accent. I think it's an interesting silver accent here. I do believe that the finished case will probably be black, or probably be this color scheme. Really looks really modern in my opinion. A big difference from the RetroTink 5X, that was not really my favorite case design. I kind of put up with it because my Chi and RetroTink, it was a really awesome device, but I'm really excited for this new case for the new RetroTink 4K Pro. Mike made another quick video showing that the SCART cable is facing the correct way now, so you don't have to worry about that. But he's also kind of showing off this all-in-one VGA input. If you look at the comments here, this HD15, which is the physical port size, will support RGB HV, which is VGA, RGBS, which is normal RGB with separate composite sync, RGSB, which is sync on green, component video, S video, and composite, all through this VGA connector. Now we also have an unfortunate reality check that the RetroTink 4K Pro will at least be over $500. I think we kind of all expected that, but Mike Chi is saying much more than that. So I don't know if much more than that means $1,000 or if much more than that means like $800. So this is definitely outside of a ton of people's price range, unfortunately. Before we get into the big story, I want to thank the sponsor of this month's video, PCBWay. I talk a lot about custom retro console mods on the channel. PCBWay is a custom PCB manufacturer. All you gotta do is upload the custom PCB files to PCBWay and they'll manufacture the PCBs for you. They even have 3D printing services, so if you don't have your own 3D printer, they've got you covered. They also provide CNC and injection molding services if you are a mod developer looking to create a professional looking product. Thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. You can find out more by visiting the link in the video description. For the big story this month, MiSTer Addons is announcing a new product line called REFLEX, which are low latency solutions for MiSTer FPGA and original hardware. There's a lot of information here. I'm going to kind of skim most of it and give you a TLDR. For what it's worth, before we start, MiSTer Addons has been working to lag test certain wireless controller and just also wired controller latencies on MiSTer to try to find out which controllers have the lowest latency, which is obviously better. Lower latency is better for gameplay. So that's just a little backstory about MiSTer Addons, other than the fact that they have a MiSTer store where they sell MiSTer Addons. So I'm going to skip talking about the fighting board. I don't really care that much about fighting games. You can read this if you want to, but I'm going to skip right to the REFLEX Adapt. The REFLEX Adapt is a multi-console controller adapter. It supports many classic controllers, multi-tap, etc. It's imminent now. I think it's due any week, you mentioned. It supports popular controllers like the NES, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, the Sega Saturn, the N64, the GameCube, the Wii. It features special modes for PSX Jog-Con, I guess that's a spinner, the PSX Gun-Con. It has an OLED screen on it, which shows real-time button inputs. I guess that's interesting because you can use it to test controllers. I'm not exactly sure what this is. Is this a multi-controller input for MiSTer? Is this a multi-controller input for retro consoles? I'm not really sure what this is going to end up being. It might just be like a USB hub that you plug controllers into, and then you can plug it into other consoles or something. So there's not a lot of information yet about what the Adapt is truly going to be, other than it's a multi-controller adapter. Okay, so the stick and spin I'm going to skip. Now the next part is Control, CTRL, which is going to be a series of drop-in replacement PCBs for original console controllers. Now, when I first heard that, I got really excited because I thought this might be wireless replacement PCBs. However, this is not wireless controller PCBs. This is to convert original controllers to be USB controllers. It's going to replace the original PCB inside of a controller, but out the top of the controller is going to stick a little USB female port. So you can stick an extension, a USB-C cable extension, to connect it into probably whatever you want, probably MiSTer, or I don't know, the Adapt, the REFLEX Adapt. I'm unsure really what that is, but this will allow you to make an original controller into a USB controller instead. At first I was curious about why USB in the first place. I mean, obviously MiSTer has USB ports that you can use with controllers, but I have MiSTer Addons original aluminum case, and I was always curious about why. Well, I know the form factor of MiSTer makes it so that the USB hub on the bottom of the MiSTer Addons case are on the side, which is not really the greatest setup when you have this like in your living room or something. It kind of makes the footprint balloon out really quickly. But it makes a little more sense when you look at something like the MiSTer Express, which is MiSTer Addons' next generation MiSTer case. It has the USB ports in the front, which is a lot more console friendly on in your TV setup or whatever, on your TV stand or something, or on the floor. So it makes more sense now that these are USB replacement PCBs for original consoles, so that you can use those controllers way easier on something like MiSTer Express or with your existing MiSTer, and use the original controller buttons and membranes with your MiSTer. There's more stuff besides just the controller products. There's going to be a new video switcher, which at first I was kind of like, you know, there are a lot of options, Extrons and the G-SCARTs, G-Comp and everything. However, what makes this video switcher interesting is this video switcher is going to be using Sega Genesis style mini DIN 10 connectors everywhere. So I know we made fun of the Sega Saturn DIN 10 is the new best video connector. It does sort of make sense because it can do RGB and component video and S video and composite and stereo audio all through the same connection. I guess sort of similar to the VGA connector that Mike Chi is using with the RetroTink 4K Pro. The form factor in the Sega Saturn style DIN is way smaller than anything else. It's smaller than SCART, it's smaller than VGA. So that means that you're going to have an ultra compact way, and it looks like this is going to feature how many ports at once. Okay, so I'm not really sure how many ports this is going to have, but it looks like there's going to be at least 3 outputs, and you could do combinations of RGB, component, S video, or composite video. So however many inputs there's going to be, you can have those going off to different outputs, different devices, RetroTink or a PVM or something on the other end. To go along with this new switcher is a series of audio and video cables that they're working on. So these will be molded plastic shells. So they're going to be custom. They're not going to be 3D printed. They're going to be custom plastic shells, and they're going to be really well shielded. So this is like a whole new category now. We've gone through SCART. We've gone through component. Now this is Saturn DIN 10. It needs to have a better name because I kind of hate Saturn DIN 10 or whatever. These are going to be a whole new series of connectors for original consoles. It says multiple consoles here. It doesn't list what the consoles that there are going to be supported. Oh, it does. It says NES, N64, Genesis, Saturn, and more. So probably like the Super Nintendo and things. So all your original retro consoles will now be able to have Sega Saturn DIN 10 style cables instead of component or SCART. Okay, last but not least, there are going to be those USB power delivery cables. I mentioned these already, but there are going to be different color-coded cables for different consoles that support different voltages. So that's kind of how we're going to keep track of these USB power delivery cables for original consoles. I think what that's going to look like is on one end will be a USB Type-C cable that you'll be able to plug into a charger, high wattage USB power delivery power adapter. And on the other end is going to be the barrel jack that plugs right into your consoles. So that's very interesting. I know this is already a pretty long video, but I found a few more details about these new MiSTer Addons products on their Discord page. Basically, the Reflex Adapt is a SNAC to USB adapter that allows you to use various SNAC adapters that allow you to connect a bunch of different retro console controllers and then allow you to connect those either to a MiSTer or a Windows or Mac computer. Now, there wasn't a lot of information about the Reflex control line of controllers. However, there is this image of, I believe that this is going to be for a Super Nintendo controller. So this is a PCB prototype of the Super Nintendo Reflex Control PCB. And last but not least, there's some pictures of the Saturn DIN 10 video switcher. So these are way old prototypes. These pictures are like 6 months old at this point, but you can kind of see the layout. In this case, this older prototype is 8 inputs. So 8 Saturn DIN 10 inputs, and then 2 outputs, and then one of them is VGA. So kind of like 3 outputs, or maybe you can switch between VGA and one of the outputs. I'm not really sure. There's a bunch of pictures in the Discord here, so go check it out if you are interested in any of these new Reflex products from MiSTer Addons. That's it for this week, but check out this video if you want to learn about Ion's new Xbox HDMI adapter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.